it's pretty important, I think, for applicants to find somebody who's doing this and get them to help with the technical questions. Because in that way, you're going to find that the answers to the technical questions actually match the system that you're going to deliver. You're not making up one in advance of having the other one.
Great. Well, thank you, Roland. I think this gives us a real clear sense of both the benefits which we're going to see for a lot of organizations from this technical control of your own piece of the internet, of the web, as well as some of the very specific challenges or requirements that are going to be expected, and what you might need to be doing, who you need to be working with if you're going to get up to speed to actually field one of these applications. I've got some questions, but I think as I'm thinking of them, they sort of will be interesting to put some whole panel. So I'm gonna move us towards that, but before I do, I've got a few slides we put together at Columbia Business School with our Center on Global Brand Leadership, put together a sort of an analysis from what we've seen talking with each of you in advance, reading some of the leading articles and papers and what's been written by ICANN and others, and seeing some of the different, both the scenarios, the cases that people are talking about, use cases for how a brand might use a top-level domain, and trying to sort of categorize these a little bit and also look at, sort of drill down what really is the benefit, whether it's a branding benefit or a sort of a business proposition benefit or a security benefit that may come, because I think businesses are going to have to look at these pretty carefully to understand. You know, I think there are going to be some businesses that simply can't afford this, and then there are going to be some that spend so many millions of dollars on global marketing that really the cost isn't a major decision. You just want to make sure that you thought this process through. But there are businesses in the middle that really have to make a strategic choice. This is a significant investment. They've really got to think, okay, how can I envision what are some ways I'd use this, and how much of a difference would a top-level domain bring to my business? And these 7 use cases. So briefly, it's talking about defending an ambiguous trademark, reinforcing brand architecture, campaign or content URLs, leveraging a broad brand platform that you may already have in place for establishing your brand positioning, branding the organization and its different parts, branding either your resellers or your partners that we talked about, and also as a tool for sort of branding your customers, so to speak. We'll give a couple examples of each of these. So the ambiguous trademark, you know, we heard the example of Apple, right? Of course, a certain brand comes to probably most of our minds, but there are, of course, other organizations in the world that could make a claim to the .apple extension. Or somebody mentioned to me Patagonia, right? A brand, but also, of course, it's a region. And if Las Vegas might apply for .Vegas, certainly the region in Argentina could decide that it's going to apply for .Patagonia as part of an overall, you know, tourism effort. Virgin being another brand. A second example or use case would be to reinforce your brand architecture. So I've heard this from Carl and some of the other folks who are talking to large global organizations with brand architecture, meaning they have a corporate brand and then they have different sub-brands underneath it. If you think of a Nestle, for example, they have brands like Haagen-Dazs. Now, in many cases, a brand right now, if you've got separate brand names like that, the focus is on the product brand, but increasingly those corporate brands are trying to, on the packaging, in their messaging, always have somewhere the presence of that corporate owner brand. Unilever is an example of a corporate brand that used to be invisible. You would not see it on its products like Dove or Axe. But now they're making a conscious effort to sort of tie those two brands together. So this is an opportunity, if that is a strategy of a brand owner, to try to make clear to its various constituencies, to tie together and sort of synergize these brands. Having your own TLD would open up a very clear way to do that on the internet. You would have Dove's website be dove.unilever or axe.unilever. Media companies, this certainly allows a very nice clean way of attaching all your properties. You're at MTV and you've got shows like Jersey Shore, or you're at Paramount Pictures and you're putting out many movies every year. To sort of tie that brand together. You've got the product or the show or the media property, and then you've got the parent brand. So our third use case, campaign URLs or content URLs. So Bill talked about this with Deloitte, that they're always trying to come up with easier, more memorable, clearer strings for their outside, constituencies. You see this with a brand campaign. You see this with a specific microsite that you're trying to send someone to. So some of the ways you can handle this, if you're, say, Red Bull, and its theme around, gives you wings. This is, a brand slogan. So you're trying to create maybe a web presence that's somehow around this image, and you're marketing it. Well, now you could simply have it be gives you wings.Red Bull. Very powerful, very concise, focuses on those two things, the idea and the brand. If you've got one of these really long domains you're pointing, or addresses you're pointing someone to, this is, I think, an actual one I saw in Ogilvy's white paper on this. DuPont owns the Tyvek, or is it Tyvek brand? This is a product, and they have a web page up which shows all the different uses of this product, and currently it's something like dupont.com/Tyvek/uses/blah-blah-blah.html. And you could simply do Tyvek.dupont/uses. Point to whatever that specific content is. So again, a much cleaner, more user-friendly, more communicable string to use in public-facing communications. Another example I've heard discussion about is this idea of a brand platform. So when a brand has a positioning that's bigger than just a tagline, it's really something they're investing globally around their communications, trying to tie their brand to a big idea. One of the prominent examples right now out in the market is Coca-Cola. They're tying themselves to this idea of happiness. They have a whole open happiness campaign. It's tied very closely to their master brand, Coca-Cola, but also they see, I think, connections to the various product brands within their family. So they could actually take out a top-level domain for that idea. What if Coke bought .happiness? And then they could have Coke.happiness, they could have Fanta.happiness, they could have Dasani.happiness. So they could have different product brands, but they could also turn this into a community. Say, you know what, we're going to fund or sponsor certain activities or events. We're going to have a whole campaign around what is happiness for New York. And you know what, we're going to give it a home. It's going to be New York.happiness. So it's, and I think this could allow for a lot of sort of engagement of these communities. So branding the organization. One use of that is companies that have a lot of different retail locations. So you think of a retailer like Whole Foods, the grocery chain. They can have, and they're already a brand that has very active web presence. So I see, for example, Twitter handles for various different locations, and they each come up with their own naming. Whole Foods Oakland, Oakland's _Whole Foods, on Twitter. Well, here you could have for your web presence very clean and consistent. You have the name of the location, the brand name. Or for a global business, talking about the divisions of Deloitte, certainly, think of a business like Dell. Rather than having Dell and all these various different country domain names, you could have them all end in .Dell. And you could also have, within organizations, their web presence is sometimes not divided around countries, but around topics. So you have a job site, or you have a news microsite within your business. So you could have news.Deloitte, you could have jobs.Deloitte. Each of these is a way of taking different parts of the organization, whether they're retail branches or divisions, and tying them more tightly in their web presence. We talked about this quite a bit, the idea of branding your resellers and partners. So automotive would be another category. I think of Honda. I took a look in my neighborhood around Montclair, New Jersey. There are several Honda dealers. They each have their own websites, totally out of the control of Honda. The naming is totally up to them. It could be much more consistent and much more controlled if they each had the name of the branch .Honda. Lastly, seventh case is we haven't really talked about this much, but branding your customers. So there's an opportunity for, if you are a customer-facing brand, you're, say, an insurance company, Aetna, a big insurance brand, and you could actually give each of your customers their own domain. So when they log in, they aren't just sort of logging into an account on your website. They actually are going to their name.Aetna, or a telecom, or even something like a music service, Spotify, a music service that's new to the U.S., established in Europe. It's very much about your personal musical taste. Well, what if you got to have your own home on the web that was your name.Spotify? Would this engage customers more powerfully? Would it also allow, in some cases, maybe you want to do this around your VIP customers? So sort of a loyalty program. You see companies like Amex who could have yourname.amex, or maybe they're only going for their, the black card. This is their premium, their most premium card. So, if you have a black card, you actually get your own Amex web domain. It'll be yourname.amex black or yourname.delta VIP, an airline such as this. So these are a variety of uses. But when we look across them, what are the actual benefits of taking any of these uses to the market? And we looked at this in terms of the principles of brand building and what really makes brands valuable for organizations and their constituents. And there's really sort of four areas that we see of possible kinds of benefits. One is cognitive benefits. This is what we tend to think of as branding, how brands are perceived. Second, there are the security benefits. Thirdly, there is new business models. And fourth, there is the possibility of purely defensive benefits. So let's take a look at what each of those might be and how a brand might decide if there's value that's sufficient to invest in. So for cognitive benefits, one thing we've talked about is image. Deloitte has a certain image as a brand. So if you're a Deloitte or you're an IBM, if you're a Nike, these are all brands that I think of as very positioned as being very forward-thinking, innovative, sort of cutting edge. So simply being one of the early brands doing this projects that image and that positioning very nicely. That's consonant with their brand. Another thing, though, is when we think of all these shorter and simpler and more concise URLs, the actual branding benefit, it's not so much image, it's really about clarity. And we have to be clear, it is a subtle difference. Yes, it would be nice to have Dove.Unilever. That's really clear in terms of how it's showing your brand architecture. But of course, you can right now have unilever.com/Dove. It is possible to have something like that. So really, it's a subtle difference between what do you have there, 3 items and 2. So I think as you're looking at mass communications to a lot of people, it's a slightly simpler message. You're putting the two adjacent to each other. There's going to be some cognitive impact, but it's, you have to think about what's the importance to your brand architecture. And then there's the question about memorability. This was another example I saw, a Budweiser landing page, very long string. This was basically about a promotion that Budweiser were doing with Major League Baseball. And of course, you could shorten it now to MLB.Budweiser. Again, we have to think about what's the difference between not just current worst practice, that may be quite common, but current best practice versus what would be the new practice. So really, right now, you do already have the option. You could think about going for MLB.Budweiser.com, or again, the Budweiser.com.MLB. So I think this impact in terms of memorability and in terms of clarity is there. It's real, but it's subtle, and I think you have to be brand spending quite a bit of money on communications for that alone, if that was your only reason for investing, to merit the cost. And there's also a question of part of this is typing in a URL we talk about. But is anyone really typing in URLs anymore? Or will they be typing in URLs in a couple of years? I mean, certainly having a few less characters by having this concise top-level domain is advantageous for social media sharing, where you've got things like Twitter or even Facebook, there's character limits. It's advantageous if you're typing on a small screen, as we're shifting more and more to mobile computing. At the same time, though, as we shift more and more to mobile computing, consumer usage is increasingly driven by search, and now we're starting to see much more voice search. So it may be that you're just going to say Deloitte. You're not typing in anything and needing to know if there's a .com or not. So I think it's important to take that into account as we're thinking about what's the consumer use of this. So the security benefits. These are, I think, a little more robust probably for really any organization that's looking at them. First, there's a question of understanding, so that sort of authentication. Really what it comes down to is brand trust. We're faced with a lot of issues around phishing on the web right now. So third parties pretending to represent an organization. You may see an email that you get that comes from Citibank.realdeals.com. And unless you're familiar with phishing or with how domain names work, you might actually think that's a Citibank website, that you're getting a message from Citibank. Whereas if Citi had the .city and trained customers to be sort of familiar with this, they would know that unless it ends in .city, unless it's something like deals.city, that it is not, it's not authentic. This next one example is actually a real name. The actual website to find out about jobs, about working at Pizza Hut, is realpizzahutjobs.com, which I found kind of appalling, because I could, register that name quite easily. So it would be much better, much safer, much more secure to be using something like jobs.pizzahut. And then, of course, as we've seen the examples of those resellers, partners that, as Roland was talking about, you not only authenticate them, but you actually have control over what they do. And if somehow they are not matching your agreement of what they should be doing online, you can literally pull them off with a flick of a switch. If we look at the business model benefits, we haven't looked at this so much. This is more on the idea of actually starting a new business, starting a new community. So this could be a unique community around a subject, like a .soccer or a location. We've had country top-level domains, but not regions, not cities. There's also the possibility of, if you raise the capital, starting a whole new business model. So you have .music, and you are going to sell to the musicians of the world. You can register a domain, your name .music, and we'll give you a lot of add-on services for how to sell and promote your music. Lastly, we have the defensive benefits. We've gotten at this a little bit, and I think we'll want to come back to it a little more in the panel discussion now. But what are the things that really it's about risk mitigation? So one is that ambiguous trademark example, right? The .Patagonia. Another is the industry category. Are you concerned if you're a major hotel chain that somebody else might be applying for .hotels? There's competitive response. We're talking about this huge gap in time before you can respond. So if you are in a major category where you have a competitor and you don't know if it has Coke is registered .Coke and you're Pepsi, well, what are you going to do if they got there ahead of you and you didn't? And lastly, as we've said, this is a long time frame, and it's, to Carl's point, it's wide open. We really don't know everything that's going to be done in these top-level domains. So there is simply an opportunity cost. You don't know what the benefit's going to be, but you do know you won't have access to it if you don't invest at this stage.